This is my true story. I spent my whole life working for my son, giving him every chance I never had. I thought when I grew old, he would honor me and include me in his life. But one day I overheard him laughing, saying I was too old to join his vacation to Paris, that I would ruin the vibe. In that moment, I realized I wasn't a father to him anymore. I was a burden. My heart broke, but I didn't cry. I acted. But before I tell you what I did next, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is there right now. And please subscribe so my stories can reach more people. I worked my whole life so my son could have everything I never had. From the day he was born, my world changed, and every decision I made was for him. I took hard jobs, the kind that wear you down day by day. I woke up before the sun, left the house while the streets were still quiet, and came home after dark when the neighborhood lights were already on. My body was tired, my hands were rough, and my back hurt more each year, but I never thought about quitting. I told myself every drop of sweat was an investment in his future. I wanted him to grow up free of the hunger, the shame, and the struggle I carried through my own childhood. When he needed shoes for school, I bought them even if it meant patching up my own. When he wanted books, I worked extra shifts to pay for them. I did not let him see the pain on my face when I came home after long hours. I smiled and told him everything was fine because I wanted him to feel safe. When he grew older, the needs grew larger, and I still found a way. When he talked about going to college, I signed my name on loan papers I barely understood just so he could study without worry. I knew it meant years of debt, but I didn't care. I told myself that if he had an education, he could rise higher than I ever did. When he needed a car to get to class, I sold some of the few things I owned that had value. When he wanted to travel with friends during summer breaks, I reached into the savings jar I had built coin by coin and gave it to him. I remember watching him board planes, laughing with friends and thinking, one day, he'll take me too. That hope kept me alive through the toughest years. I supported his career as well. When he started his first job, I helped him move, paid deposits for his apartment, even bought furniture so he could live comfortably. When he wanted to start his own business, I co-signed the loans and let my name carry the risk. I trusted him completely because he was my son. I didn't keep anything back from myself. I lived simply, ate simply, and wore the same clothes year after year because every spare dollar went to him. And still, I never regretted it. I told myself all fathers live for this, to give their children more than they had, to sacrifice so the next generation can stand taller. And more than anything, I dreamed of traveling with him one day. In my younger years, I had never gone far. Work kept me chained to one place. But I always thought that in my old age, when my body could no longer work so hard, my reward would be to see the world through his eyes. I imagined us walking down streets in new cities together, sitting in cafes, laughing over meals, maybe even visiting Paris side by side. I pictured myself standing by him, proud that I had given him this life, proud that he wanted me by his side. For me, travel wasn't about luxury. It was about love, about connection, about being remembered. That dream carried me when I was too tired to keep going. It carried me when my back hurt so much I could hardly bend. It carried me when my hands cracked in the winter from work. I thought, one day he will turn to me and say, "Father, pack your bag. Let's go together." That thought kept me alive. But I was wrong. He grew into a man who wanted everything I had given him, but not me. And the very trips I dreamed of sharing with him became the same trips he used to erase me from his life. The signs of exclusion did not come all at once. They started small, almost hidden, in little excuses that I tried to ignore. At first, when my son went on trips with his friends, I told myself it was normal. Young people want their freedom. They want to go places and laugh with people their own age. I sat at home and waited for him to come back, listening to his stories, smiling as he showed me pictures on his phone. I told myself my turn would come later, when he was older, when he would finally say, "Father, now it's your time, let's go together." But that moment never came. As he got married and built a new life, the trips continued. Only now, instead of friends, it was with his wife. They traveled to beaches, cities, and mountains. Each time I thought, maybe they'll ask me to join, just once. Each time I heard the same excuse. It's a couple's trip. Or, it's just for us this time. I nodded, smiled, and told him to enjoy himself, but deep inside, the words cut me like a knife. I had carried him on my shoulders as a child. I had given him the freedom to fly, and yet he looked at me as if I had no place in his world anymore. One day, I overheard him on the phone telling a friend about another trip. I asked afterward, half joking, if there was space for me. He laughed, not kindly, but in a way that stung. "You're too old, Dad. You'd slow us down." I forced a smile, pretending it didn't hurt, but inside I felt myself shrinking. Too old. Too slow. Was that really what I had become in his eyes? Not a father, not a man who had built his life, but a burden. Each time they packed their suitcases, I sat at home looking at my own, still tucked away in the closet. I would touch the handle, imagining what it might feel like to finally use it. But the days passed, and the invitation never came. Slowly, I realized this wasn't just about trips. It was about something deeper. He no longer saw me as part of his life. He no longer thought of me when he made plans. He wanted me out of sight, out of mind, while he enjoyed the very luxuries my sacrifices had made possible. And so, by the time Paris came up, my hope was already fragile. Still, a part of me prayed that this time would be different. Paris was not just another city. It was a dream destination, the kind of trip that families remembered forever. I thought, surely he would want me there for this one. Surely he would honor me with a place beside him. But deep down, I already knew the answer. The signs had been there all along. I was not part of his plans anymore. I was not part of his dreams. I was no longer part of his life the way I had once imagined. The final humiliation came one evening when I wasn't even looking for answers. I'd been sitting quietly in the corner of the living room while my son spoke on the phone. He thought I wasn't listening, but his voice carried through the walls. I heard him laugh, loud and confident, the kind of laugh that cut deep when you realize it's at your expense. He said to his friend, "Of course he's not coming to Paris. Can you imagine? He'd ruin the whole vibe. Too old, too slow, always dragging things down." His words hit me harder than any insult ever had. I sat there frozen, unable to move, my heart pounding like a drum in my chest. My throat tightened, my hands trembled, and I stared at the floor, ashamed of myself even though I had done nothing wrong. I wanted to believe I misheard him, but the words repeated in my head, sharp and clear. He'd ruin the whole vibe. That's what I was to him now. Not a father, not the man who had carried him through poverty and struggle, not the man who had sacrificed his entire life so he could live comfortably, but a burden, a problem, something that ruined the mood of his perfect trips. He didn't see me as part of his life anymore. He saw me as a stain he had to wash out, a shadow he had to escape. In that moment, every sacrifice I had made came flooding back into my mind. The nights I went hungry so he could eat. The years I spent working double shifts to pay his school fees. The money I poured into his first business when no one else believed in him. The trips I paid for when he was younger so he could see the world, believing that one day he would take me with him. And yet here I was, sitting in the next room, being mocked and erased like I was nothing. When he ended the call, I stayed silent. I didn't confront him. I didn't shout. I didn't ask him why he would say such cruel things about me. I sat in the dark, swallowing the humiliation like poison, letting it burn inside me. Later that night, I heard him and his wife laughing together, talking about the Paris trip. They spoke about hotels, food, and shopping, but never once did they mention me. I was invisible in my own home, erased from the life I had built. The pain was worse than hunger, worse than fatigue, worse than any struggle I had ever known. Poverty had hurt my body, but this betrayal broke my soul. I went into my room and opened the drawer where my passport lay. I picked it up, held it in my hands, and stared at the cover. For years, I had dreamed of stamping it with the names of cities, traveling with my son, making memories in the places I had only ever seen in pictures. I had saved it for that one promise I thought he would keep. One day, Dad, we'll travel together. I whispered those words to myself in the dark, my voice shaking with pain. But now, I realized they were lies. Lies I had believed because I wanted to. Lies he had told me because it was easier than admitting he never intended to include me. I sat there for hours that night, my eyes wet with tears, my body heavy with shame. I thought about the little boy who once clung to my hand, who once called me his hero, who once said he would take care of me when I was old. Where had that boy gone? What had replaced him? Now I was nothing more than an inconvenience, a man he laughed about behind my back, someone unworthy of standing beside him in Paris. That was the final humiliation. Not just being excluded, but being mocked for it, erased with cruelty, reduced to a punchline. And in that silence, in that deep wound, something inside me shifted. The pain began to harden into resolve. If he thought I was weak, if he thought I had no power left, then he had forgotten who built the ground beneath his feet. He had forgotten whose name was still tied to his lifestyle, whose sacrifices had carved the path he walked so proudly. He laughed at me for being old, but he forgot that even old hands can still close doors. That night I decided, if he could erase me from his dreams, then I would erase him from his comforts. That night, after hearing him mock me and say I would ruin his vacation to Paris, I sat alone in my room with the passport in my hand. The house was quiet, but my heart was loud with pain. I stared at the cover of the passport, running my fingers across it, and I thought about how many years I had waited for the chance to use it with him. I had always believed that when I grew old, he would turn to me and say, "Father, it's your turn now. Let's see the world together." That dream had carried me through long nights of work, through meals I skipped so he could eat more, through winters when I wore old coats so I could buy him new ones. I had lived for the hope that one day the sacrifices would be repaid not in money, but in love. Yet here I was, excluded, mocked, erased like a stain he wanted to hide. I sat with memories swirling in my head. I remembered when he was a child, and I carried him on my shoulders to the park. I remembered when I held his hand crossing the street, when he looked up at me with trust in his eyes. I remembered when he told me as a teenager that he would never forget what I had done for him. Those words used to fill me with pride, but now they rang hollow, like promises spoken and forgotten. I asked myself, how did we come to this point? How did the boy who once called me his hero grow into a man who laughed at me behind my back? I placed the passport down and stared at the wall. The pain inside me was heavy, but beneath the pain, another feeling began to grow: clarity. I realized that all these years, I had been waiting for him to give me dignity, waiting for him to fulfill the promises he made as a boy. But dignity is not given. Dignity must be claimed. And if he thought I had no power left, he was wrong. Because while he erased me from his vacations, he had forgotten something important. The foundation of his life still rested in my hands. I looked at the stack of papers on my desk: bank documents, loan agreements, credit cards tied to my name. I had co-signed them all. I had given him access because I trusted him, because I believed he would always treat me with respect. He thought he owned everything, but legally, I was still the backbone of his financial world. He had mocked me for being old, for being slow, for being someone who ruined the vibe. But the truth was, without me, his entire lifestyle could vanish in a moment. The longer I sat there, the clearer it became. His arrogance had blinded him to the truth. He thought I was powerless, but in reality, I held the strings that kept his world together. And as I thought about the years of sacrifice, about the humiliation of being mocked for the very life I had built for him, I felt my sorrow harden into resolve. He had shown me no loyalty, no respect, no love. So why should I protect him anymore? Why should I continue to shield him from consequences when he had thrown me aside like nothing? That night, I whispered to myself, enough. Enough waiting. Enough suffering in silence. Enough being erased. He thought Paris would be his triumph, his luxury, his escape, but I would make sure Paris became his downfall. As I sat in my room, staring at the papers spread across my desk, I realized my son had forgotten something very important. He thought he was in control, thought he was free from me, thought he had outgrown me. But he didn't know the truth. All of his vacations, all of his luxury, all of his lifestyle rested on a foundation I had built and still controlled. Every credit card he used, every hotel booking, every plane ticket, they were tied to accounts I had once co-signed. Years ago, when he wanted to start his career, the bank had refused him because he was too young, too unproven. I had stepped in, putting my name on the line, tying my own stability to his dreams. He thought that favor had faded, but it hadn't. My name was still there. My authority was still written in black and white, and with one call, one request, I could take everything away. He had mocked me, laughed at me, told his friends I was too old to join him, but he had forgotten that even an old man can hold the keys to another man's freedom. The more I thought about it, the more I realized how blind his arrogance had made him. He strutted through life like he built it himself, like his money was his alone, like his comforts were carved from his own hands. But I knew better. I remembered the day he came to me with his business plan, desperate for help. I remembered the bank manager telling him no until I signed my name beside his. I remembered the nights when bills piled high, and he called me in panic, and I stepped in to save him. And I remembered when he told me, "Don't worry, Dad. When I make it, I'll take care of you." That promise, like all the others, had been broken. Instead of care, I got humiliation. Instead of honor, I got laughter. Instead of inclusion, I got exclusion. As I picked up the papers and read through them, I saw clearly that my son was not as untouchable as he believed. He had built a castle, but the foundation was mine. And if I wanted to, I could pull the ground from beneath him. He had forgotten the truth, but I never had. I had been silent all these years, trusting, forgiving, hoping. But humiliation has a way of waking you up. His words about Paris, about me being a burden, had burned away every last piece of patience I had left. Now I was no longer the quiet father sitting in the corner. Now I was the man who remembered the power he held. I sat back in my chair, and for the first time in many years, I smiled, not with joy, but with clarity. He had thought I was powerless, but he was wrong. He had thought he could laugh at me, but he was wrong. He had thought I would stay quiet forever, but he was wrong. The truth was simple. Everything he took for granted, everything he used to erase me, was still under my control. And soon, he would learn that the old man he mocked still had the strength to cut his wings. The next morning, I woke up early. I didn't eat breakfast. I didn't make tea. I didn't even open the newspaper. I sat at the table with the phone in my hand and the papers in front of me. My heart was steady. My mind was clear. I knew exactly what I was about to do. For years, I had carried my son on my shoulders. For years, I had been the one to step in when he stumbled. For years, I had watched him live in comfort while I lived in silence. But now, after hearing him mock me and erase me from his life, I had decided enough was enough. I dialed the number for the bank. When the operator answered, I gave my name, my account details, and the loan numbers that were tied to my son's credit cards and accounts. The woman on the other end asked me to verify my authority, and I did. She checked, confirmed, and said calmly, "Yes, sir. Your name is still the primary co-signer. You have full rights to make changes." Those words were like fire in my chest. I thought of my son laughing about Paris, saying I would ruin the vibe, and I pressed forward. I told her I wanted to revoke authorizations, freeze all funds tied to my son's cards, and block further international transactions. She hesitated, asking if I was sure, reminding me it would affect travel bookings and future payments. I said firmly, "Yes. Do it now." I listened to her typing on the other end, each click sounding like justice being written. Within minutes, she confirmed. The accounts were frozen, the cards disabled, the authorizations revoked. My son's financial lifeline was cut. Paris was no longer possible. His hotels would not be paid. His plane ticket would be declined. His meals, his shopping, His dream of walking through those streets would end at the airport gate. I sat there in silence, holding the phone, breathing slowly. I didn't feel guilt. I didn't feel regret. I felt clarity. Before hanging up, I asked her to send me confirmation documents, and she did. I printed them, folded them neatly, and placed them on my desk. I stared at them for a long time, and I whispered, "You didn't want me in Paris. Now you're not going either." Those words were not spoken in anger. They were spoken in truth. My son thought I was powerless, but in one call, I had reminded him that I was the one who built his world. And with one call, I had taken it back. The day of the flight arrived faster than I expected. My son had been bragging all week about his luxury trip to Paris. I heard him on the phone with his friends, telling them about the restaurants he wanted to visit, the hotel suites he had booked, the expensive shopping he planned to do. He walked around the house with confidence, his suitcase open, throwing clothes into it carelessly, humming like a man without worries. Every time I passed by his door, I felt the sting of his words echoing in my mind. He'd ruin the vibe. I kept silent, but inside, I carried the weight of what I had done. I knew what was coming. He did not. That morning he came downstairs dressed smartly, dragging his luggage behind him, smiling like he was walking toward victory. He didn't even glance at me as he headed for the door. To him, I was already invisible. I sat in my chair, hands folded, watching him leave. He strutted out proudly, as if the world belonged to him. In that moment, I didn't speak. I didn't stop him. I let him walk toward the trap he had built for himself. Hours later, the phone rang. At first, I let it buzz. Then it rang again and again, and I knew who it was. Finally, I picked it up. His voice was frantic, filled with confusion and anger. "Dad, my card isn't working. The airline says the ticket isn't valid. The hotel says the payment failed. What's going on?" I listened quietly as his panic spilled through the line. He wasn't calm and proud anymore. He wasn't mocking me anymore. He was desperate. He was humiliated. He was stuck at the airport, luggage in hand, while his friends boarded the flight without him. I waited for him to finish shouting before I answered. My voice was calm, steady, and sharp. I said, "You didn't want me in Paris. Now you're not going either." For a moment there was silence on the line. He didn't know what to say. His breathing grew heavier, and then he screamed, "How could you do this to me? You ruined everything." But his words no longer hurt me, because I knew the truth. I hadn't ruined anything. He had ruined himself when he chose arrogance over respect, when he chose humiliation over gratitude, when he chose to erase me from his life. I hung up before he could speak again. I sat back in my chair, closed my eyes, and breathed deeply. Somewhere far away in a crowded airport, my son was facing the consequences of his choices. And I, the old man he mocked, was the one who had placed those consequences in his hands. The fallout was immediate, and it was brutal for him. At the airport, while his friends handed over their passports and tickets without a problem, he stood at the counter arguing with the staff. His voice grew louder, his hands waved in the air. But no matter how much he begged, the answer was the same. The payment had failed, the ticket was invalid, the funds were frozen. People in line began to stare. Strangers shook their heads at the scene. His wife's face turned red with embarrassment, trying to calm him, but she too realized the truth. He was not going to Paris. While the rest of his group boarded the plane, he was left behind, humiliated in front of everyone. He called me over and over. At first, his voice was full of rage, shouting, demanding answers, telling me I had no right. Then, as the hours passed and his pride fell apart, the anger turned into desperation. His tone shifted from shouting to pleading. "Please, Dad, just fix this. I'll make it up to you. Just let me go." But I remembered his laughter, the way he mocked me, the way he said I would ruin the vibe. That memory was stronger than his begging. I stayed calm and answered him once. "You didn't want me there. So now you are not going either." Then I hung up. That was the last time I picked up his calls that day. When he returned home hours later, dragging the same suitcase he had packed so proudly in the morning, he was not the same man. His shoulders were slumped, his eyes were dark, his pride was shattered. He didn't speak to me. He didn't even look at me. He went straight to his room, slammed the door, and stayed there. But the walls could not hide his shame. I heard him arguing with his wife, heard her crying, heard her say she should have gone without him. I heard his friends' messages coming through on his phone, mocking him, laughing that the man who bragged the most about Paris never even got on the plane. His humiliation was complete. For me, the fallout was peace. I sat in my chair, sipping tea, calm and steady. I did not smile. I did not celebrate. I simply felt the balance restored. He had excluded me from his life, erased me from his plans, mocked me as too old, too slow, a burden. But in the end, it was not me who stayed behind. It was him. The aftermath of that ruined Paris trip stayed with my son longer than he expected. It was not just a canceled flight. It was the collapse of his pride. When his friends returned from Paris, they shared photos online, smiling in front of monuments, eating expensive meals, walking along the Seine. My son stayed silent. He avoided conversations, avoided questions, and when people asked why he didn't go, he lied at first, saying there was a last-minute issue. But lies cannot cover humiliation. Everyone knew. His friends mocked him privately, saying he bragged the most but achieved the least. His wife carried bitterness, reminding him often that she had been embarrassed in front of strangers. Every time she scrolled through the pictures of the trip she missed, the anger returned, and their arguments grew louder. What he thought was just a failed vacation became a shadow over his home. For me, the aftermath was different. I felt no shame, no guilt, only relief. I had carried the pain of his words for too long, the humiliation of being mocked and erased. But now the humiliation was his to carry. I walked around the neighborhood with my head higher. Neighbors who once asked me if I was excited for my son's travels now shook their heads, whispering about how it had all fallen apart. I didn't correct them. I didn't explain. I let the silence speak. He had laughed at me, called me too old, too slow, but in the end, he was the one who stayed behind. He had thought Paris was his triumph, but Paris became his cage. Inside my home, things grew colder between us. He could no longer boast in front of me. He could no longer act as if I was invisible. He knew I held the strings. He avoided my eyes when we crossed paths. He ate in silence, left early in the morning, returned late at night. But I could see the weight on his shoulders. He was not the same confident man. He was humbled, even broken. And though he never admitted it, I knew he finally understood. The father he mocked was the same father who had built his comfort and could take it away again. The aftermath also gave me clarity. I realized that for too long, I had been waiting for gratitude that would never come. I had been waiting for him to see me the way I saw him, to honor me the way I had honored him. That day never arrived. Instead, he gave me humiliation. And so, I gave him justice. That balance was enough for me. I no longer hoped for his promises. I no longer dreamed of traveling with him. I let go of the illusions I had held on to for years. The Paris trip that never happened became the lesson neither of us could forget. For him, it was the day he learned arrogance has consequences. For me, it was the day I reclaimed my dignity. Justice for me did not come with shouting, it did not come with fighting, and it did not come with public arguments. It came quietly, like the turning of a page that could never be turned back again. My son thought he was strong because he had money, because he had friends, because he had trips and luxuries. He thought I was weak because I was old, because I sat quietly, because I stayed in the background. But the Paris trip showed him the truth. He learned that all his strength rested on the foundation I had built, and when I chose to move, his world collapsed. That was my justice. He told his friends I was too old to join him, too slow, a man who would ruin the vibe. He mocked me behind my back and erased me from his life. But in the end, it was not me who stayed behind. It was him. standing humiliated at the airport with a useless ticket and an empty card. And that humiliation weighed on him far more than his laughter ever weighed on me. I did not celebrate, because justice is not celebration. I did not clap my hands. I did not shout with victory. I simply sat in my chair with a calm heart. For the first time in years, I felt balance return to my life. The dignity he tried to take from me was restored. I no longer felt like a shadow in his world. I was the man who had reminded him of the truth. Without me, he had nothing. And that truth cut deeper than any insult. As days passed, I watched him carefully. He walked differently, slower, less sure of himself. His friends no longer admired him. His wife no longer smiled at him the same way. His arrogance had cracked, and though he tried to patch it with excuses, the wound was clear. Everyone around him knew he had failed, and he knew deep down why. He never spoke it, but his eyes told me the story. When he passed me in the hall, he could not meet my gaze. When he sat at the table, he ate in silence. He had learned the lesson I had given him, and it was written on his face every day. For me, justice was not about revenge. It was about dignity. I had sacrificed too much to let him erase me without consequence. I had given him my years, my health, my strength, my money. I had carried him until I could no longer stand, believing he would carry me when I was old. Instead, he tried to throw me away. My justice was reminding him that I was not disposable. My justice was showing him that love without respect is nothing, and arrogance without foundation will always fall. In the end, I did something for myself. With the same authority I used to cut his trip short, I booked a small trip for myself. Not to Paris, not to luxury hotels, not to fancy restaurants. I booked a train ride to a quiet coastal town, a place where the sea touched the sky and the air was clean. I sat by the water, drank simple tea, and watched the waves. For the first time in many years, I felt peace. Not because I had hurt him, but because I had finally honored myself. I no longer waited for him to include me. I no longer dreamed of walking through cities by his side. I had walked through enough storms alone to know I was strong. Final thought. He thought Paris was his escape, his luxury, his world without me. But I made sure Paris became his prison. He stayed behind, and I walked forward with dignity. That was my justice, and I carry it without regret.